This is a show about facing fear, unlocking courage, and taking action.
Courage isn't necessarily a daunting thing.
It's going to give you more purpose. It's going to give you more drive.
It feels like making a courageous decision is going to get you closer to who you aspire to be.
It's knowledge plus faith plus action equals courage.
There's data you can look at and say, yes, this person has the most brilliant CV. But that's not what you think when you agree to found a company with someone or work on something with someone. You think, do I believe that we will be able to make this thing successful?
All right, folks. If you would have said that I was going to have a quantum physicist on the show, I would have been like, this is the Courageous Podcast. But the more I've learned about my guest today, and hopefully Pri, you are going to layman this up so guys like me can get it. Because when I really think about it, I'm like, this is above my pay grade. And I started to research the space. And first of all, why aren't we doing this podcast in Maui? I got no invite. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I am really, really delighted to be here. Would have been awesome to have you here in Maui. It is a gorgeous sunny morning here. And I got my run in this morning along the water. And I was thinking about this conversation. So really excited for it.
There is nothing like running in Maui. And I should say, for me, it's slow jogging in Maui. Although I know like one of your passions is speed and like the irony, right? And there are connections here to the quantum world with you actually like when you think about speed for you as a runner, am I like you are pushing yourself? Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And there are so many things that are common across how I think about science, how I think about technology, and of course, how I think about my running and athletic endeavors. So,
all right, we're going to cover it all. For starters, this concept of quantum and I believe it's a qubit.
Yes.
What the heck is it? All right, we're off to a good start. What the heck is a qubit and how does one decide this is what I want to study for a living?
All right. So my journey in quantum technology actually is very nonlinear. As a graduate student, I started my PhD at Caltech, and at that point, quantum was not a technology. In fact, I got into this field thinking that, great, I'm a quiet introvert and I'll get to do this thing and people will leave me alone. And it was this, very esoteric area because folks were talking about new algorithms, how new algorithms might come out of what you could simulate on a quantum computer and be this cycle there. So I thought, gee, this is the field for me. I like thinking about physics. I like thinking about, questions in science. And I get to explore this as a career. Fast forward a few years, it turned into something that everyone's talking about. Because of course, not only can we theorize about qubits, which is where I had entered the fields, or talk about these algorithms in the abstract, but actually people are making these devices, right? So a qubit, this idea of a quantum bit where you can encode information in more than just 0 and 1 is really, really powerful. In fact, it enables algorithms that you wouldn't have, so ability to compute that you wouldn't have purely classically. And quantum mechanics is one of those fields, it was early 1900s, we realized that classical mechanics is not sufficient, so quantum mechanics was introduced, but it really wasn't a technology till I'd say the last decade. And now, of course, is a technology that has become indispensable to the third wave of compute. When we think about the next generation of quantum and AI, this is a technology that everyone's talking about, and there's a good reason for that.
I mean, you can't go anywhere without people talking about AI. Is quantum built on top of AI? Is it built separately from AI?
So early days, it was considered a technology that is parallel to AI. Now we tend to think of them as both being part of the next wave of compute. So essentially, you could think of quantum computing as being a way of accelerating what you can simulate with the biggest, baddest, largest AI data centers. And then there are classes of problems that we know we can't solve on classical computers. that you could solve using quantum computers. So even I'd say the largest and fanciest AI chips, there are certain classes of problems that they can't tackle. And that's where quantum comes into the picture. So you can kind of think of it as a symbiotic technology, a synergistic technology, pick your favorite word, and they go hand in hand. But they're both at that point where the next wave of compute is being realized using this combination.
I mean, like you said, you were an introvert that happened to just like, in some ways, maybe it's fear. Like, please don't make me have to talk to people. I'm just going to hang out in my little arena and study the space. And here we are talking. So I'm curious, why you, why now? And also, why do you think that this does fit in the courage circle?
Yeah, a few different reasons. So this is, a technology that wasn't a technology, and somebody had to say, and I'd say I'm part of that wave of technologists that had to say, we're ready to make the jump from the lab to something that is going to be a venture-backed business. And not only a venture-backed business, but now something that is, leveraging manufacturing. We're talking about chips. We're talking about real semiconductor manufacturing. And that was, well, you would call it courage, but felt more like a blind leap to me at that point, just to say that, I'm not a trained technologist. I have no business background in the sense that I'm not, an MBA from one of the schools where folks learn how to take a technology. I'm just a builder and a nerdy girl that decided that this technology needs to impact everyone's life. And that really, I think, is part of why I was drawn to our conversation today, because I never thought of it as this is what I'm going to do. This is what the next 5, 10, 20 years of my life will look like. It just felt like something that here's the moment, let me grab it, and I'm going to go all in on this. So,
yeah, I'm smiling a little bit here when the good doctor says I'm just a builder, because, and you call me off on this, Pri, if I'm getting this wrong, okay? Because I don't think I am, but quantum physicist, you're an engineer, you're a professor,
yeah.
You're a policymaker. I almost need another hand here. You're a venture partner. You're a doctor. I mean, you're up pretty early. You're a runner. I believe you're also helping our government actually write the playbook on quantum policy. And I have good friends that are locked in right now on the ethical side of AI.
Right.
And I don't know if they're part of working with the U.S. government, but this seems to be the next thing. We're at the thing after the thing, and you're helping our government with that playbook, right, on these breakthrough technologies. That doesn't seem like I'm just a builder to me.
Well, it started as being just a builder, and all of these other hats have been part of that story of how do I get this technology to have impact, right? I never thought of myself as somebody that would be advising on policy, but I realized the way that this technology can be accelerated, the way we can go fast is, of course, with the right policy signals, the right support from DC. And that involved going and talking to the right people in DC. And I do a lot of that. The other piece, of course, the investment piece. Again, it was clear that there's private capital out there, but private capital doesn't always know how to think about quantum. And so backing the right quantum technologies is something that involves engaging with that private capital. And, I started talking to a large venture fund, DCVC, and just said, I could call the balls and strikes and be on the outside, or I could get in it and say, yep, I have skin in the game and I want to make this happen. And that's been my approach to this, as going from a builder to an investor, a policymaker, or a technologist. I've run out of easy ways to describe who I am. It's the worst Thanksgiving conversation for me, when folks ask, so you're and then there's, this blank where folks expect I have one word to describe what I do. And I always just say, I think really hard. So
here's the thinking really hard. Well, I'd like to unpack quantum a little bit more and how it's going to change the world, in your opinion. But I also think the thing that makes the show go really well is, it's the Courageous podcast. So we kind of have to unpack Pri a little bit too. Where'd you grow up? Why were you on this path to introvert? It clearly there was a glitch in the system, and here we are, right? Like, talk me through like where you grew up, and have you always been a runner?
Yes. In fact, I was a runner before I was a physicist. And my story actually is that of a typical athlete realizing that they're not going to be a pro. So I was a runner. I ran the 800. And of course, middle school, high school is when, actually more middle school and now even earlier for the kids who are breaking into this professionally. But I didn't know anything. So I just thought I'm fast. I'm reasonably good. I had that typical I can run with the guys approach. And I did a bunch of physics. I, did the physics Olympiad. But I never thought of physics as the career. I thought of running as the career because I had, of course, been exposed to professional athletes, but I'd never met a physicist who did that as their job, right? So I'd not been exposed to that. And eventually, there was a lovely coach. I'm not going to name him. He pulled me aside and said, you're a good runner, but I hear you're better at this physics thing. And I think that might be more what you want to do going forward. And in some ways, that really sucked to hear that, right? Because everyone, I think, as an athlete wants to hear that, oh, somebody has faith in my athletic endeavors. But, I thought, yeah, well, this physics thing is pretty fun too. Maybe I'm going to do more of that. But I still did not think of it again as, this mainstream technology thing that I would do, translate, et cetera. I just thought, I'm going to go to college and figure out if there's a fun startup I can work in or, something that allows me to be a builder, be a scientist, and see where that goes. And of course, that plan has really taken its own journey now.
Hey, where'd you grow up?
I grew up on the East Coast. I'm an only child and I don't have parents anymore. So now I always say my home is where I am, which now just happens to be sunny Southern California. And
Well, we have that. We have that in common. I'm down in San Diego. I was a DMV kid. So for those of people that don't know what I'm talking about, that's DC, Maryland, Virginia kid. That's what we call the DMV. Did you grow up? Where on the East Coast?
New York.
Okay.
So
cool.
Not too far from you, but not a terrible New England winter either. It's enough colds, but manageable colds.
When you're running, and this is me getting to quantum, but I'm just fascinated by this because you're a ritualized runner, right? You're a fairly disciplined runner. I mean, you went running this morning. When you run, do you run to think or do you run to unthink?
Depends on the day. Sometimes I run because I want to have that be the only thing I think about. And then there are times where I go on a run and I think, okay, this is my moment to solve all of life's problems. And usually a speed workout is where the first happens, where I just have to turn off all my thinking. And, I have a coach now, his whole mantra is find your fast. So I tell myself, okay, this is a workout where it's going to hurt. It's not going to feel doable. But if I can make a little breakthrough, just a little jump, that's going to be really important. And then there are runs where, folks say, okay, it's aerobic pace, conversational. I do all of my running mostly alone. So I, think of conversational as being a conversation in my head with myself. I hope I don't speak out aloud. And I think about the work, think about a problem. I try and, turn it over in my head, think about the various ways that maybe I haven't thought about solving it yet. And that really is, running for me in the other more aerobic fashion.
Where I was going to go was when you're running, how often is it a time machine to do you see yourself as New York pre or middle school pre? And it's like going back to this pure time versus the intentional overthink almost, or think, because you're in the speed business. Like that's kind of right? Like which pre or is it or are you a pendulum? Are you going back and forth between the two?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I think I am my most intense when I'm running. I think every photo of me running looks like I have something going on, right? And that's also how I feel. I think when I run, there's this raw freedom to it. And that's not something that I experience in other contexts. I think most of my human interaction, I try and have a happy smile and, talk about things a little differently. But when I'm running, I'm like, this is it. This is me. Time. Got to keep a pace, beat the clock, whatever visual I have that day. And that's how I'm going. So I think in some ways, maybe that is back to being that younger self that's like, I got to do this. This is the most important thing. This is all I got to do today is get this run in at this pace,
All right, let's talk about quantum. Let's talk about again, first and foremost, how would you describe that to somebody like me? Like what quantum can actually do? And from a speed standpoint, I'm all for, you've got my attention. So try to layman this up for a guy like me.
Sure. So when we think about quantum, it's all about use cases. And if I were to break it down for you, I'd say we want to be able to discover new materials, new molecules, solve logistics problems. We want to do all of this better, faster, and in a way that is more efficient than the way we compute today. So in some ways, how we do it is not as exciting as the fact that these applications become available to you. These scenarios become a possibility if you have access to a quantum computer, right? So when we think about why would you want to discover a new molecule? Well, all of medicine, all of drug discovery, personalized medicine, whatever you want to think about it as impacting human health, relies on our ability to find new molecules, find ways that our body interacts with these molecules, and to be able to do that very, very efficiently, to be able to screen through that very efficiently, be able to do that in a way that doesn't, take up half the world's energy, which is what we would need on some of these large AI data centers. I think that's really important. So one of the things that I try and communicate about quantum to everyone is, the building of the technology is exciting, but it's what the technology unlocks that's even more exciting.
Yeah, there's a little bit of journey and a little bit of destination. It's it's both, right? It's funny, the way I would describe courage often, and this is just obviously a topic that I've tried to be an observationalist on for quite some time now, but the media has always done a poor job of making courage feel like a cherry on top at the end, right? Like there's a news story and we hear about some moment of heroic behavior and it's like courage, cherry on top, or movies, right? We both live in Southern California. It's it makes it feel like courage, this character I want to follow at the end, when really it's the journey. It's almost like, no, it's a learned behavior. Yeah. I'm hearing this too. I'm hearing this quantum is as much about the journey and the process in the middle as it is what it can unlock. It's both. I imagine you have a hard time going to the DMV because it's the process is so inefficient. It's do you just have a hard time anytime you're you see inefficient processes?
I do. It's interesting because in every step of the development of this technology, the work that I've done in this field, the next thing just seems so far away, right? And it's so hard. And it feels like if I even try to grab for it, maybe it'll move even farther away. So I should just stop talking about it, right? And that is definitely a moment where I have to remind myself, what's the worst that could happen? We're going to try and imagine this device that has capability that nobody's tried to make before. We're going to try and run an algorithm that nobody's attempted before. And the worst that could happen is it's going to fail and I'm going to go on a run after and it's going to be great, right? That's but I have to convince myself to do that. By the way, I don't have that same experience at the DMV. I go to the DMV and I think, this is going to be a disaster. And if I fail, I have to come back here and do it again. So this had better not fail. Two totally different experiences.
Well, it's also really interesting that I don't know if I put this together, but so running in some ways is that's not going to be a fail. Like running you is now your reliable place so you can control the outcome, right? And so it's funny, I have a new book that just came out called Headamentals, and it's all about fundamentals for your head. And I'm the story side of it, and I have someone on the science side. And like what I learned from Dr. Susie Burke is like, oh my gosh, like one of the things we call it your monster, the monster in your mind. One of the things that the monster in your mind is feasting on overthinking. And overthinking is just an act of our brain trying to get control of something that it can't control. And so it wastes a ton of energy, and you wonder why you're exhausted. And so this topic, which you can't totally control yet, you do not know the outcomes. Therefore, there is consumption of energy, which is exhausting you, which is why you need your run, which is something you can control. There is joy there. But there's a ton of fear that probably must come with this business. Anytime you're telling yourself the worst thing that can happen is it gets further and further away, I have to go on a run. Yes?
Right.
Fear-wise, I'm curious, what is the largest fear right now for you when you think about quantum as a whole?
Yeah. This is it's a nascent technology. There are many unknowns. And the biggest fear I face is, what if there is some obvious solution and we walked right by it, right? And I feel that when, somebody says, oh, we're going to design this like very complicated chip, it's going to do this, that, the other thing. And I'm thinking, is it possible that there's a simpler way and we just haven't thought about it? And that fear, I think, also shows up on the investment side, right? Because I always think to myself, hey, this is an investment. This is a bet we're making. This is a company that is promising a certain path, a certain timeline. And there's so many things that could go wrong, right? So there is that constant, I'd say, saying constant fear sounds a bit sad. I'd say there's that constant adrenaline kick that I get out of knowing that this isn't all a straight shot. We're going to try as hard as we can. I and people in the field are doing everything we can to make this technology real in a very, very short amount of time. I think the promises we've made, the compressed timeline that we as a field have proposed is very ambitious. But then I also think, look at the energy the people are trying. Look at how smart these folks are. Look at how hard everyone's working. Like, look at all of these other things, right? So it seems very far away. And it seems like as soon as you make a timeline concrete, it's going to be unattainable. And then on the other hand, every piece of data I have, right, I look at it and I say, we promised that would happen by Q3. It happened in Q1. We are ahead. We just have to take that step, do that, jump there. So
I've interviewed a man named Dr. Joe Belezzo, who emergency rooms, he's like, just some of the technologies that they've created for those arenas and similar, chasing something that's never been proven before. And you do it once. And suddenly there's this concept of, and I always love sharing this concept with those in the science space, belief. And now the field believes and the team believes, right? But as a scientist, usually we need larger reams of data before we agree on belief. But how does belief play in the field?
There's a lot of belief. I think I think without that, you're not going to show up every day and say, I'm going to try and do something that no one's done before. There's belief in the fact that today is going to be successful, that I'm the right person, I have the right circumstances, the right, whether you're making a device or you're writing equations, you think I have the right capability to do this, I have the right team. Those are all acts of belief. That is, there's data you can look at and say, yes, this person has the most brilliant CV, but that's not what you think when you agree to found a company with someone or work on something with someone. You think, do I believe that we will be able to make this thing successful? And that's, usually the question that we're asking. I think for the technology itself, there's so many people out there who would say, there's no way this is going to succeed, right? There is no way this is going to happen. Maybe there are folks out there actively trying to prevent this from being a technology that, is in everyone's hands. And you just have to say, we're going to overcome that because we have a vision, we have the skills for it, and we recognize that this is a needed technology. And I think that's, that there's just all belief there. There's some data sprinkled in, but yeah. And I think that's not perhaps the answer you expected from a scientist, but.
Well, the equation we use for courage is knowledge plus faith plus action equals courage. And you need to have all three levers or it's something else, right? And you think about creating something completely new and innovative. And a lot of people, and especially in corporate America, where we're getting brought in, there's knowledge, there's little faith, and there's no action. But if you take knowledge and faith without action, that's paralysis.
Right.
If there's faith and action without knowledge, that's a reckless move. And then knowledge and action without faith, and when we talk about faith, we don't mean it in the religious sense, we mean it in the belief sense. So knowledge and action without faith, if you're numb on the inside, you're probably working on status quo. You're working on safe. So you need each of the three for it to be, you're living proof of this every day. But when you find, you talked about being a lot of things, including a builder. I'm sure you're also a leader. When you're working with a team on something like this, if you have those thoughts that this might fail, I'm sure, are you talking openly with your team about, are we wasting our time? Do we all feel like we're on the right path? Like, what's that cadence?
Yeah. There are times where we come together and ask, are we on the right path? Is this trajectory really the one we want to be on? And then there are some moments where, as person that's leading the team, I have to say, this is the vision we're committed to, and we're going to go this route. And we're going to try this. We're going to go give this everything because we can't constantly second guess either, right? It's similar to a race plan. Say, well, this is a race plan we're committed to, and we're going to go till we can't go anymore. And I think if we have done everything right, that can't go anymore will be a little bit after the finish line. So that is, just something that I have to think about a lot. When do you share any of the doubts or fears you have with the team versus thinking about, now is the moment to execute, go after it, and not worry about it.
In the spirit of jumping to the end, let's talk a little bit about some real world quantum applications. You've kind of touched a little bit on medicine, or maybe I brought up medicine, but I'm curious on medicine. Is there sensor? Is there security?
Well,
give me help us get to the end, and then we can work our way back.
Right. So, in a world where everything we promised with quantum technologies is there, it's successful, you'll be able to get very, very personalized, targeted drug design, medical care that will essentially leverage the full power of quantum computation. There'll be sensors that, can do not just 10% or 50% better than classical sensors, but orders of magnitude better, right? So, of course, we all think about, diagnostics when we go to a doctor and we say, well, how well do you know this? Or how is this, this little blob you see moving, this little gray thing, how well do we know that that is what you're claiming it is, right? So this is a technology that could change all of that by orders of magnitude. And that's one of the ways that it will impact and totally change life sciences. It's going to change how we think about what we consume, how we know what we've consumed is in fact interacting with the body the way we think it is. Because those are all molecular interactions, biomolecular interactions. Those are all problems for computation, right? And that's something that we've really tried to emphasize. And there are entire teams that are focused on impact of quantum in life sciences and human health, because that is an area where, we see just the delta between where we are and where we could be is so massive. Okay. So that's one part of this. The other is, of course, thinking about how quantum and security, something that completely secures all communication, something that's able to secure your transactions, your interactions online, and you have the ability to verify, you have the ability to validate, and you can do that all relying on physics-based security. And that's something that quantum can promise. So all three components of this are here, right? The compute, the sensing, the communication, networking. And, I could go on with examples where, I think that we'll be using quantum for not just molecules and medicine, but also for new catalysts. That's something that's going to help us change the amount of energy that goes into the Haber-Bosch process, right? That's how essentially we get all fertilizer in the world. Without that, we would all be, pretty starved. So these are all processes that, require a lot of energy. Discovering new catalysts has been very hard for folks because, of course, these catalysts all have built in them some form of interaction that relies on quantum mechanics. You take a quantum mechanical problem, you're solving it on a classical computer. It's not something that is all that straightforward. And so we haven't made progress on some of these canonical problems. And you see all of these limitations go away the day we have scalable quantum computation, the day we have large-scale quantum sensors, and of course, networks.
There are quantum computers now. Yes. What is the difference between a quantum computer and like a regular computer?
So a quantum computer today is something that, and by the way, they come in flavors in the sense that you could have superconducting, trapped ion. It's like picking your favorite cuisine. They have advantages and disadvantages, but they are not yet at that point of fault tolerance. They're not at the point where we are able to fully extract all the utility that I just told you. So we can do some small problems on these computers, and that's been important. That's a good proof point that we're heading in the right direction, but they haven't yet overcome that threshold to fully unlock all of the utility that quantum computers can offer. So there is some work to be done between where we are and access to utility scale quantum. And everything I described here today is something that the field is working towards. We know we want to solve these problems. We know that quantum computation is one of the ways to get there. It's a matter of, whether we're there in a few months, a couple of years, certainly under 3 years. And that's, this question of fast comes up a lot because everyone, of course, wants it to come even faster. So 3 years seems so far away. It's, can you make that 18 months? And what does it take to go from where we are to where we need to be in, a compressed timeline? And that's something that I think about a lot.
Says the runner that's trying to run faster. I'm not surprised to hear that. Pri, question for you. Do you feel that, look, when I think about quantum computing, and again, trying to be prepped to have this conversation is like one of the first times I've thought about the topic. So I acknowledge that for me, this is like science fiction being flipped into science fact. And so there's a few immediately thoughts that come to mind. One, is this like a global field that's working towards this when you say field, or is this like a race between different countries on who can get there first?
Right.
From your perspective, what is it?
It's definitely a race. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a competitive athlete. Think about the transformative potential of everything I just described, right? You'd want to get there first. And not just because you want to say we got there first, but because so much of, the economy, so much of what the benefits of this technology will be, and of course, the security implications will entirely transform our society. And we want to be, the first there. You don't want to be in second place in a technology that transforms the world. And we have a few things here going for us. The technology where, the various Nobel Prizes in quantum computation, quantum devices have been given to American scientists. The technology was invented here. A lot of the work that's being done in quantum computation is here. A lot of the work that's being done in quantum sensing and networking is here. The companies that have been started, some of the, capital that's gone to these companies is all here. But it's still a race. We're not, miles ahead. it might end up being very similar to, finish line as the New York Marathon as recently as yesterday, where, you saw the finishers within a hundredth of a second. And you don't think of a marathon as being decided within the hundredth of a second, but it can be. And this is one of those technologies where there's been years of development. So you think that, we'd be spaced out and we would know who the clear winners are. But, it's a very competitive technology and folks are pouring in money in order to see if they can get there first. So this is a race in that sense.
Well, again, you brought up the marathon. You can't talk about race without talking about pace, right? And like here you are sitting at this intersection of, it feels like science. It feels a little like national security as well.
Yep.
And it feels like innovation. So how do you balance the pace of discovery with the patience of policy?
Right. Well, this is an example of where innovation and private capital, private industry has just done, amazing things. So we've been thinking about in various conversations, what are the right policy signals and levers without getting in the way of innovation? And this is really important because this is a technology where talking about and defining where it is will be outdated in a few weeks, right? So if you start essentially trying to go through it through the typical way that we define policy, it's just not the right fit. But if you think of it as how do we win? How do we get this to be an American technology for the future? You think about, okay, what are regulatory hurdles we could remove? What are ways that we could incentivize some of these businesses not only to develop DIP here, but to set up manufacturing here? What does quantum manufacturing look like? Where would some of these facilities go? How can states be helpful? Those are all questions that you can ask if you think of this as an innovation race where policy is playing a helpful assist role rather than a leading role.
It's in the van in case something goes wrong, basically, right? It's ready to give you what you need from a resource standpoint.
I love that analogy.
Pri, I feel like I'm curious to get your take on this. I feel like you are running the race, and running can sometimes be an individual sport versus a team sport, right? And I imagine I'm very curious how many other quantum physicists are intensely running, literally running, or are they introverts in the lab? Like the dynamic of the team. You mentioned the field, but realistically, like, give me numbers on your team. Like, how big is the team and that level of intensity? Or like, this is, in some ways, it is fearless on like running towards winning a race. Is everyone at the same mental space, or are you responsible for like delicately nudging or reminding, or like, what does that team dynamic look like?
Oh gosh, the team dynamic, really is varied. So when it comes to technology, I'd say there are a lot of folks out there who recognize that, they've gotten a PhD in this field or they've gotten some other advanced degree. Some of them are technologists coming from other fields into this, so they're bringing that expertise. I think that piece of it, I feel, is more like we're all in this race together, and we're all pretty well matched, and we're pacing each other and trying to get to win this as a team. There are other parts of this ecosystem where sometimes you feel like, hey guys, we could move this a little faster. This would be really nice. So the gentle nudging comes into play there as well. And that's been, I think, something that I view as my role is to bring this technology to life by bringing the ecosystem together. So there are companies that I work with that are, fairly, I'd say, established companies. I'm not calling them startups is going to be a little bit of an embarrassment, but there are also some very early stage startups that I work with that are, a disruptive idea for folks out of, I would say garage, but not quite, but out of a lab. And they say, I have this one piece of the puzzle that I can solve that nobody else can. And I think, okay, let's invest in that and let's work together with that team. So I interact with, big and small, parts of the ecosystem. I think that a lot of us got into this field without realizing it would become a technology race. And that's been a shift for everyone in the field in terms of how we talk about it, in terms of how we talk about the timelines, in terms of how we train people, in terms of how we talk to policymakers. That's been a shift. And actually, I'd say that shift has been fairly recent. It's been maybe the last couple of years where, you see mainstream conversations with technologists where, it's no longer, I have a cool thing, I want to talk about the cool thing. It's how do I win this race?
Forgive me, but because I came from brand, I can't help but step back and look at AI as a brand, right? Look at quantum as a brand. And so this is an exercise in using that part of my brain as I think through this component here. So there's this colossal wave that we're on right now that I don't see an end on the brand called AI. And it's terrifying for a lot of people. It's exciting for a lot of people, depending on where you are, right? And then there's this other wave. It feels like a very small wave right now behind that wave, or maybe it's 6 waves behind. If you think about using our Southern California ocean here, right? That's this quantum wave. So the first it's a two-parter. First, are you sort of grateful that AI is riding this wave? Because it's like we, the mainstream, now recognize that new stuff, of course, is always coming. And then 2, the wave is almost long enough, it's a long enough tail that lets quantum figure out its act. So by the time the quantum wave comes, we're ready to capitalize on it. Do you see, is that how you see this going?
I tend to think of it as a coupled set of waves that have come through. It's all part of that, what we formerly called the third wave of compute. And that has been, a build. And then, of course, we don't know when this whole thing it shows no sign of cresting. There's a reason for that. There are so many problems we need to solve that are all reliant on new compute, faster compute, more efficient compute. And these are 2 technologies that have just brought that into everyone's daily life. So in some ways, I'm very, very grateful that AI was on the leading part of that wave, because explaining to folks the power of new compute, the power of being able to do very, very energy efficient compute was not something that, was on my explainer radar, if we're, using that terminology. So it makes it easier, but also makes it a little harder, right? Because so much capital has gone into AI. So a question that, comes up is, well, should we think about the valuations and what quantum companies are worth the same way? Should we think of them slightly differently? So there's always that advantage, disadvantage piece of being on the back half of a new technology that's being introduced.
I love how you said you could call balls or strikes, or you could bring your bat to the plate. And it is. I feel like you are in this arena. It's an uncertain arena. And you can't help but, right, like you said, I get it. Like, yes, the fear of maybe this doesn't turn into what you think it could be. And if that happens, you go for a run. But that, realistically here, is there a breakthrough when you allow yourself to dream that's just lights you up? Is there one breakthrough that's that would be amazing if we could just follow this thing through and X?
Yeah, I think if we have an efficient way of doing a fault-tolerant quantum computer, an error-correcting code that is highly efficient, I think that would be the breakthrough that I say, okay, now the chance of failure has really diminished to a very, very small number, right? So that's kind of the big, when there's variability in that timeline, right? When I say something is few months to 3 years out, that variability is coming from, can we do error correction efficiently enough on near-term devices to hit fault tolerance? And if I could find a way to, say, okay, we're there, we can do very low overhead quantum error correction, and then we're there, right? And then then I can say, okay, now I'm going on a celebration run rather than I ran into a wall run.
I thought we were immediately taking that process to the DMV, but clearly this is for bigger stuff than just the DMV. Dr. Pri Narang, thank you so much for like going after it, explaining this in a way that I can understand it. I mean, I think the takeaway for me is like courage is not just something for the battlefield or a boardroom. It's sometimes in the lab, the courage to experiment, to fail forward, to chase ideas that no one else has seen yet. It's pretty wild stuff. Keep at it. Being the builder, the leader, the policymaker that you are. And, you know, if you're cool with it, I'd like to like circle back with you and like almost every quarter just to see. It just feels like this is something that we should be paying more attention to. And pun fully intended, keep running the good race. And let's see where this thing goes.
Thank you. I will certainly keep you updated, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and your listeners here today. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Courageous Podcast. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts so more people can find us. See you again next week.